God is good, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the races across Terminus in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. As we get closer to the launch of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, we're now beginning to think a little differently. Before, we were just interested in the game. What's going to be in the game. Now that we've almost seen the class reveals for all of the different classes, we're beginning to see a lot of streaming of gameplay. We have a lot of opinions and a lot of different characters on YouTube doing content. Now we're beginning to look a little more about what are we going to play when the game is out. Now, that's not just about class, because we're also going to have to make another big decision at the very beginning of the game. We're going to have to pick what race we want to play as. Now, if you're new to my channel, I would like to real quick say, please consider subscribing if you're interested in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, especially if you just want some content until the game's out. You just want to hear people talking about the game. That's what we do here. That's what I strive for, is to constantly release more content regarding Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Sometimes it's just completely opinionated. Sometimes I'm just laying out what's available, the information that we have, and bringing it to you. If you like Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, you're following it, you can't wait for it to launch, then please just consider joining us here at the Napalm, as we will make sure that you have plenty of content to devour. Okay, so there are going to be quite a few choices at launch for the races. We already know most of them. Now, I'm not gonna lie. The way that the game is laid out as far as why these races are on Terminus leaves it wide open to do more, okay? This isn't a typical situation where usually the lore of the game kind of almost hurts the developer's ability to release new races, but the way all of this is set up, that these beings were put here, you know, they weren't naturally evolved on Terminus. These are races brought from other places. It just leaves the universe wide open as far as what the developers want to do in the future. But I do believe that the races that they've told us about so far, which will be the Archai, the Dwarves, the Dark Mirror, Ogres, Humans, Halflings, Elves, Gnomes, and Scar. Those are, I'm pretty sure those are going to be the races at launch. I do believe we'll see more. Now, they may be some that are different races that aren't playable in the game, but you see them out in the world, different factions and different races. That could definitely be something that is in the game. But the way that they set it up, I mean, they could go much further and do basically whatever their imagination comes up with in the future for expansions, etc. But let's talk about the ones that we know are in the game, because it's really hard to talk about what they are going to do in the future. It's impossible, really. So we'll start with the Archai. Okay, the Archai, basically they're like they're forged from a crystal planet called Roa. Basically, it was they were made with an energy, a magical energy. They were designed to be slaves, actually, on their original planet, because they were forged with magic, actually in their essence, in their very being. This gives them a unique advantage. Basically, they can manifest markings and textures. If you look at what they look like, you can see this always represented on their body. So basically, what that is it can be different. It can be different elements like fire, water, vapors, minerals. When I hear that, that does make me wonder, is that going to be part of the character creation? In other words, when I'm making an Archai, am I going to get to decide what that element is? Can I pick fire and then I'll see the red, you know, kind of like his inner being is made out of fire, and you just kind of see it bursting through his skin. Is that going to be an option for me, or is it random, or is that something we do? Like, they can actually harness any of the elements, and we at some point can change to different ones, because, you know, there is the acclamation system, and I do believe that the acclamation system is definitely going to be involved with the Archai. Now, the Archai, because they have essences inside of them, that would give them a natural ability to be better, with flame, to be better in hot situations, right? Extreme temperature, extreme heat. They should be more resistant to that, etc., etc. So That will be interesting to find out. I do believe we'll get to see more of that when we get a little closer and they start talking more about the when more information can be revealed on the character creator. But that's something I'm thinking about as I find out about the Archive. Back on their planet before they got to Terminus, it's worth mentioning the Archive were slaves, so they actually waged a war. Okay, a war for freedom, and they overthrew their captors, became free. So now that that would be pre Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Now they're renowned for their culture, being very high in endurance, and a legacy of jubilation, song, celebration, that kind of thing. So they're very proud of their freedom and that they fought for that and they earned that. They tend to come from an area, Suroa, which basically is just like a little home, right? Roa being their home planet. Suroa is in Terminus, where that's their home island. Okay, that's where the Archive come from. So you can basically go ahead and assume that if you pick Archive, that's the race you decide to go with, which they look really cool. I think that's going to definitely be a popular pick. Then you will start in Suroa. Okay, that will be your starting. I don't want to say city because Suroa is an island, but that will be your starting area. Now, before I move on to the next race, let's go ahead and talk about what the Archive can be, because a lot, the classes are race specific, right? Like there's some races that you can't be everything. Okay, there's actually only one that you can be everything. We'll get to that in a minute. But the Archive, here's what they can be. An Archive can roll a bard, a druid, a monk, a shaman, a warrior, or a wizard. Okay, so I know they look really cool, and it would be awesome to have a Dire Lord Archive, because I can just kind of picture the kind of spells and everything that the Dire Lord would do, and how cool that would look on an Archive character model. But unfortunately, it looks like that the Archive can't be any tank except for warrior. So at least you got one. So basically, if you look at it, the Archive, if you're looking for a support type, heavy support type class, the Bard looks like a good option. The Druid, they're technically a healer, but they have a lot of support utility. And you got the Shaman as well, which is, in my opinion, going to be a very strong healer. A very strong healer. But also, of course, they do have a lot of support utility as well. Not quite as much as the Druid, in my personal opinion, but they do have that. And then, like I said, if you want to be a tank, the Warrior is what you're definitely your only option with the Archive. Now, of course, if you're looking for more of a damage-dealing role, they have the Monk and the Wizard. Okay, so Monk being more hand-to-hand kind of situation, up close and personal, and then of course you have your Wizard from afar blasting some fires, which we're going to learn a lot more about the Wizard soon, because in August, which is really close to now, it depends on when you listen to this video, it may already be out. If it is, check it out. As soon as I find out information about the Summoner, the Wizard, etc., I'm going to be doing videos on those. I'm very excited about them. But let's move forward. Alright, so next up, let's talk about the Dark Mirror. I'm very excited about the Dark Mirror. I feel like this is a really cool and almost like a risky move that they're doing this, because the Dark Mirror is the race that you could say is a mermaid, right? They have legs, but they can also get in water and transform and get the bottom half fish, right? So they get a lot of abilities dealing with that as far as being in the water. Okay, I have a feeling that a mirror, if you're near water, you're just got a big advantage, right? Like you can get away from the mobs really quickly. You can travel. If we're talking about an area where there's a river running along, they can jump in the river and just really book it, right? So I do like the Dark Mirror. The Dark Mirror is what my wife is planning on playing. She's always just going to go with the most beautiful race in the game because it's very important to her. But me personally, before she had picked, I was just kind of looking through them. It's kind of just, what am I going to be? This is way back when we got the very original artwork for all the races. I was looking through deciding what I wanted to go with. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I haven't 100% made up my mind, to be honest, but I was trying to guess what she would pick. And to be honest, I thought she would pick the elves. The elves just look beautiful in this game, right? But I think she's a little bit tired of the elf situation. They've been used and abused in every fantasy situation you can think of. So she decided she didn't want to go with the Dark Mirror. So this one is a little personal to me because I know that's what she will be playing. But let's talk about it. Now, the thing about the Dark Mirror that is interesting to me is that they don't like the other races, okay? They're all about the mirror, okay? It's all about them. They really don't befriend other races, okay? That I believe this could have a lot to do with the fact of they're from the sea, right? They're from a water-type environment. Probably they're used to being the only race in a water-type environment. They're now beginning to expand their kingdoms beyond into the land, but the planet they're from, it was all about the oceans, right? Like, it was huge amounts of ocean, like a water planet. I mean, I'm sure there was land, but if I'm pronouncing it correctly, it was the planet by Sul. And there was a lot of wars, which is really cool, between the ancient Leviathans. If you don't know what Leviathan is, it's a really cool giant sea monster dragon, like a sea dragon kind of thing. And there was a big war between these ancient Leviathans. And, things just got so crazy that, the kingdoms were getting destroyed. Not just in the sea, but also on the land. So, during this war, they created the new race, which was the Mirror, and gave them, really good might and kingly hearts. The Mirror were created basically to strike back against the Leviathans, which were wrecking, the world. So the Mirrors were able to do that, so that kind of shows you how powerful they really are. And they pushed back against the Leviathan and broke the ward, and they basically flourished and their kingdoms really thrived. We need to get to the part where the Mirror get to Terminus, okay? So the Mirror are dumped into the Terminus has much water, okay, lush seas. So they were dumped in basically into the water, and it wasn't working so good, okay? The water on Terminus was like poisoning the Mirror. So in order to survive, the god of battle basically sacrificed his body, which was made, his body was literally made out of the seas from Isul, the planet they're from. And basically this created a sphere of water within Terminus's ocean, allowing them to be able to retreat basically to this area and be able to breathe and thrive and survive. But after some time, though, these waters mixed back in with the natural waters of Terminus, and there was apparently a lot of very close followers to the god of that sacrificed himself to save them, and apparently they drown because of their allegiance. So that just kind of shows you how loyal the Mirror really are. Now, of course, this would lead the Mirror to basically all die as they're being poisoned. So you had Sirenai, who was another god who rushed to help them and basically just transformed them, okay, changed their bodies so that they basically could walk on land, so that they could breathe on land and have legs to walk on. This changed the Mirror into basically what we see now. Now, as Sirenai basically walked out, kind of led the way from the water to the land, basically Sirenai collapsed on the shore. It caused a lot of anguish to the Mirror, and although it did save them, there's definitely a sense of sorrow that has turned into hate and darkness, okay? And that's basically why now what we see on Terminus is the Dark Mirror, okay? So apparently this is obviously a very adaptable race that has went through much transformation. I would assume that if you took the Dark Mirror and put them back on Isul, the original planet of Isul, then you would probably see a huge difference, both in appearance and demeanor. Now, they went on to build a city in honor of Sirenai, and they lived there. So that I would assume that city is where the Mirror are going to start. If you choose to be a Mirror, that's where you'll start at. And They look pretty cool. I mean, they really do. Obviously, there's going to be a huge affinity with water in these, obviously. But let's look a little bit about what the mirror can be. So they can almost be everything. They definitely have one of the larger, not the largest, but they have a larger amount of options. The Dark Mirror can be a bard, a cleric, a dire lord, a druid, an enchanter, a monk, a necromancer, or a rogue, or a summoner, a warrior, or a wizard. Okay, so they got a lot of options. All right, the only tank they can't be is the paladin, right? They can't be a paladin, but they can be a dire lord, which makes sense, being their past and everything, what the dire lord can do. They can be a warrior as well, and they also got two of the healing classes. They can be the cleric, or they can be the druid. They cannot be a shaman, however. And so they got a lot of options, basically, the Dark Mirror. The only ones they cannot be are the paladin, the ranger, a shaman. That's it. They can be every other class, so that's pretty cool, I think. Now let's move on to the dwarves. Okay, so the dwarves are very cool. Any artwork from Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, you see the dwarves, I mean, these look freaking cool, man. In the live stream videos where you can see them, they really did a good job. I feel like sometimes dwarves are kind of ruined. I think sometimes people try to go into the Tolkien-esque type dwarf and they kind of mess it up. Like, they don't get it exactly right and just kind of don't look like a fun playable race. I think though that with Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, Visionary Realms done a good job. I think they're aesthetically pleasing. I think they look cool, and I've always kind of liked the whole dwarven type cities underground and the mines. And, you know, I'm definitely a Lord of the Rings fan, so, you know, especially in The Hobbit, the dwarves were always just such a big deal, and you really got to see into their world a lot, and the dwarves are just awesome. So basically, though, in Terminus, I have a whole video about their dwarven king who sacrificed his immortality just so he could be with the dwarves and roll with them, and you know, he's still honored to this day and actually still alive, like, you know, still with them. And of course, if you played any game or you've been into fantasy type anything, then you know that dwarves, of course, are huge into smithing and, of course, battle. You know, they're known to be hardy warriors. When I think of a dwarf, I think of a tank, okay? And I am going to be a paladin, and a paladin and dwarf are compatible. I'm highly considering being a dwarf. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I normally like to just be a human, right? In most games, I just want to be a human or something very human-esque, and just kind of, I want to live in a world where there are a lot of other cool races, right? Like, I just want to be me, living in a cool world that has lots of cool races. Like, I usually don't want to be the cool race. I just want to live and be in that world with them. However, in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, I'm really digging these dwarves, man. So I really might, I'm not sure yet. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know, but I'm definitely. It's gonna be a hard decision. Okay. Now, dwarves have a very good history line where they know exactly where they come from, because their creator is also their king, right? So they have like a full lineage and historical reference to go all the way back. And as I said before, he basically gave up his immortality to become their king. He's highly devout, you know, or the dwarves are highly devout to this king. The dwarves are all about deep strength and keen perception, right? Perception, big word to use in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, right? Back where the dwarves are from in Oldassa, the dwarves there was no rival, right? Like, the dwarves were just king of their domain. But of course, there was Causus being the good king who decided to, you know, Causus being their creator, and he decided to become their king and lose his immortality. He did have a rival whose name was Razik, and Razik obviously was jealous of dwarves and everything, and that was their enemy. You know, the dwarves also, I'd like to mention, were the first to reach Terminus, or at least it's believed. Now, were they really, or is it just that the dwarves have such a good historical record that it appears that they are? We don't really know, but it's not set in stone, but it's believed that they were the first. Basically, the dwarves settled in the southern tundra. They named it after Kazas. They named it basically Kazas Reach, or Kadasa, which that's what it means. And Kazas taught them how to fuse ice and stone. Basically, when they fuse that, they're able to make a material called Kodark steel, which is unbreakable. Okay, so it can be cut thin enough to wear like a fabric, but it's unbreakable, right? So you can imagine being able to make something like this, and that this just set the dwarves on a path to just smithing and absolute success and fame, right? Because they were taught this specific skill to make this Kodark steel, which is unbreakable but thin enough to wear as fabric, right? Like, that's really cool. And so basically, they, with their riches and wealth, they built the Audacian Citadel right in the heart of Kadasa, and there they rule as the champions. You know what I'm saying? Like, they storytellers and companions and mystics, artisans, warriors, everything. All right. And then, of course, when you read into the lore of the dwarves, there's definitely some race built-in story mechanics that, you know, they're just so cool, right? Like with their king Kazas, and with his rival Razik. It's very cool, and I'm not going to get into it right now. This is really not a lore video. I just want to talk about each race. I do like the style, the aesthetic, visual aesthetic of the dwarf. I think is top notch. Now let's talk a little bit about what they can be. The dwarf can be a bard. They can also be a cleric. They can be an enchanter, a paladin, a rogue, or a warrior. Okay, so there's a lot of things the dwarf cannot be, but it's lore based. Okay, all of this is. They didn't just decide to be jerks at Visionary Realms and limit what you could be and make you sad, right? Like, there's lore behind it. Make any sense? Or a dwarf wizard, right? Like, I know it would be cool because, you know, you might like the race in a certain class show. I get it, but you know, it is what it is, and most games do. You know, you got to have some lore, and you got to have some individuality to each race to make them feel more unique. And most people that play a dwarf, I think, are probably going to be rolling something heavy armor based anyway, because, you know, dwarves are smiths, right? It just looks cool. Alright, let's move on to the elf. Alright, so we all know what an elf is, right? Well, at least generally we know. You know, elves are all about their architecture, their agriculture, arcane, and, you know, their affinity with nature, or should I say like wind, rain, you know, the different elements of nature. They're also known to be kind of political. Usually, you know, elves are a very political race. So basically, the elves came from a planet where there was 3 different power structures, basically, and one got, you know, larger and decided to begin attacking the others. The elves were led to a safe area in the east, at a place where they were originally created, and once they got there, they were met with this giant tree, right? Like, just going up, way up into the clouds, like, you know, from afar it looks like a mountain kind of thing. It's got big, huge rainbows and vegetative life and animals living all over it, and a whole ecology just on this one tree. And, you know, it would take, basically, to kind of give you a scope on the size, it would take you half a day to journey around it, right? Like, the base of the tree was a half a day's journey. You know, and we're not talking about on foot, like walking. We're talking about like on a horse, like going full speed. It would take you half a day just to run around the base of the tree. So it was huge. Now, the aforementioned group of elves that were, you know, starting war and everything, well, eventually they found them, right? They came to where they were, came to basically kill them, and basically just drove them away, you know, drove them into hiding. And this is when the elves began being known as the Ashen. They started painting their faces, becoming, I guess you could say, a lot more in tune with nature kind of situation. And they ended up taking refuge in some mountains, right? Like the Rhone Mountains. The mountains were still near the tree. They called the tree the Lucent. and they began to build a new civilization there. And unfortunately, it looks like the war followed them, and their holy tree was burned alive. And from everything going on, basically, that I just mentioned without getting too deep into it, this is when the elves sprung their own branch from the Ashen, and these are the Ember, which is basically described as a vibrant class who seek to return their people to the ancient days of promise before the age of pestilence. So going back to basics kind of thing, elves. And anyway, as far as aesthetically speaking, the elves look really cool. I mean, they're going for that elegance and beauty. I think is really what they're going for with the elves. We haven't really got to see a whole lot. We've seen some, but we haven't seen a whole lot of artwork on the males. So I'm really specifically basing this off of the images I've seen from the female elves, and they look beautiful. Like, it's just beautiful artwork for them. Now let's talk a little bit about what the elves can be. An elf can be a bard, a druid, an enchanter, a ranger, rogue, shaman, summoner, warrior, or wizard. Okay, so a lot of options in all the various different archetypes. Here's what they cannot be. An elf, and this actually is probably why my wife did not pick elf. They cannot be a cleric. They cannot be a dire lord. They cannot be a monk or a necromancer or a paladin. Okay, but they can be all of the others. So they have a wide arrangement. So there's only 4 that the elf cannot be. So much less limited than something like the dwarf. Okay, but the Darkmere definitely can be more things than the elf. And I do believe most likely the elf is going to be a highly played class. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the halfling. The halflings are a very interesting race. Mainly because of their aesthetics, their visual aesthetics. I mean, they look really cool. Every time they're like shown in a video or artwork, they got all the feathers all of them. They look all cool, right? Like, they just look awesome. Basically, the way I personally am looking at the halfling. If you ever played The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, right? The Kokiri Forest, where you start, right? There's all the kids living around the tree, right? They're all, yay, they're happy, they're kids forever, right? That's a halfling, okay? Basically. And that, in my opinion, you just want a quick, easy way to reference what this race is like. I think that's probably about as close as it's going to get, right? They're all about survival and nature. Once again, I am not knocking visionary realms, okay? In no way am I, okay? Sometimes paying homage to something you love, I mean, that's a good thing, right? Or at least in my opinion. So I was just talking about The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and that's what the halflings remind me of. Probably a coincidence. But maybe not, right? Like, maybe it was a little homage to that. I don't know. But it's worth mentioning. I think it's kind of weird that the halfling was actually originally known as the Kiri, right? K-I-R-I, right? And with the references talking about from Ocarina of Time. And also, their planet was like called Hirith, like almost like Hyrule, right? Like Hirith. Maybe not, but maybe I'm looking too much into this. But Kiri, the people Kiri, or the Kirin race. And then they're like children forever kind of thing, right? Like, it's just a little crazy. But anyway, they do look really cool. I want to see more about them, to be honest. And I just think that with everything going on, the halflings are political. They have bloodlines that they believe are building blocks of their society kind of thing. They're a nomadic type race, though. So there's like different tribes of them, okay? There's several different ones, and they're all very different. And some of them hate other ones in different tribes, things like that. But they're very cool looking. I think that that's going to be a fun. If we can really, and I believe we will be able to, if we can really dig into each race's history. And, there are going to be like racial type quests, I don't want to say quests, but storylines that you can follow that will really be perception based on the race that you are, obviously. And I think that some of these are just going to be really cool. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about what classes, right? What classes can the halfling be? Because they're very limited. There is more limited than the halfling. The halfling can be 5 different things. Just like the gnome, right? The gnome can be 5 things. The ogre is definitely, we're going to get to that. The ogre is definitely the most restrained on what they can pick. But anyway, the halfling can be a bard, a druid, a ranger, a rogue, or a warrior. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit like, what? They can be a warrior? It's kind of crazy. But that'll be cool. So I'm looking forward to seeing some halflings running around as warriors, right? Like, because everything else they can be is like, you know, a much softer class as far as defense goes. So it'd be really cool to see a freaking halfling all decked out in heavy armor, right? Especially with the way that they've been presented to us so far, right? Like with the feathers and the fluff, and it's very interesting. But I do like the halfling. I think they look really cool, and because Ocarina of Time's always just been like a really cool game to me, definitely inspired a lot of my love for everything I love about video games and things. I just feel like it was a true masterpiece, way ahead of its time. And because the halfling kind of pulls me back to that, I just have definitely a soft spot for them. I probably won't play one, but if I decided to be a druid, man, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like subconscious because of some of the abilities of the druid. It just makes me think of it. I'm not sure. But man, if I'm in a druid, I really want a halfling druid, right? And like we can do that, and it just feels right, Like, so if I ever did decide to do a druid, I think I would definitely be a halfling, or even a ranger. Like a ranger halfling just sounds so cool, right? But anyway, moving on. Let's talk about the humans, right? The basic, the boring class for some people. I mean, I disagree. I usually do pick a human. Humans just tend to usually be well balanced in video games. And I don't know if that's true in real life, but pretty balanced as far as abilities or racial abilities or their starting stats. Plus, like I said, the role play aspect of it alone. I am a human, so it's very easy for me to kind of understand their kind of political structure and everything, and just live in a world where there's a lot of other really cool different races going on. So I usually do pick humans. But anyway, the humans are going to be from Thronefast, okay? A huge part of the lore, okay? Thronefast is huge. And of course, just like every other situation when you mention a human, whether it be in real life or in a video game, lots of war, lots of strife, right? And humans they've been endurance, they kind of are able to break through and have this honor and all this kind of stuff. So basically, without getting into it too much, I don't want this video to go on for like 30 minutes or anything. The humans are basically very cool story, alright? Very cool. If you're into the lore, definitely check out Monster Koala's channel. He really goes into all this stuff, like, super in depth. Like, I'm not even going to try to compete, alright? I'll have a link at the end of the video. I usually do link to Monster Koala at the end of the video, so I just really like his stuff. And I feel like he can just, like, kind of explain things really well, especially on a lore side, because if you just go to the website and try to read this lore, it's, like, really complicated, right? Like, you have to, like, take notes and be like, wait a minute now, like, in the Third Age, this happened, and it's like, what? Dude, I don't know what's going on. Like, I need this to be a little more structured. And I feel like that Monster Koala definitely does that. Like, once we're in the game, all the stuff that's on the website and the lore sections probably make a whole lot more sense. Or maybe I'm just an idiot, but, I have a lot of trouble sometimes following it. Like, I did, like, one lore video. It was kind of crappy, like, and it took forever, right? Like, I was really, like, confused, like, scratching my head, like, I don't even know if I'm telling the truth. Like, I'm reading it straight from the source, and I feel like maybe I'm messing it up somehow. It's complicated, but, good stories, or when, they've really built a world here, so the story's, like, really, it's real, right? Like, yeah, we have history books, and we just kind of be like, yeah, 1974, this happened, but it's complicated, right? Like, things that happen in history, they have a backstory. There's a reason. There was leading up to those events, and a lot of pieces in play, right? And the way that they're building Terminus, they're really trying to identify all these pieces, right? So there's a lot of moving parts, and it's just complicated. But anyway, getting way off topic. Let's talk a little bit about the human, as far as what a human can be. And this is easy, because a human can be everything, right? Like, literally every class the human can be. So I'll go through them anyway. The human can be a bard, a cleric, a dire lord, a druid, an enchanter, a monk, a necromancer, a paladin, a ranger, a rogue, shaman, summoner, warrior, wizard. Everything. The human can be any of the classes they want to be. So we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of cool options in Pantheon. I'm not sure the human will be the most popular race or not. I'm really not. We'll have to see. I don't know. But I will definitely probably either be a human or a dwarf, right? That's where I sit right now. We'll see. Things change. Things change, you know. Alright, but now let's talk. Let's talk about the gnome. The gnomes are very unique in Terminus, okay? When I think of a gnome, I definitely do not think of what they've done in Terminus, okay? Which is really cool, by the way. So basically, the gnomes, they're arcane. They really don't even have a physical form, right? So that's why they look kind of strange. They got like the masks on, right? And you see like this energy kind of like coming out of them, because that is them, right? Like the mask looking face, they have to wear that or they wouldn't have a face. You see what I'm saying? Like they're like containing themselves inside of the apparel or the clothing that they're wearing. So if you was to take all that off, they would just be like this weird light soul thing, right? So I thought that was very cool, and I'm not sure how that's going to play out when you're making a character, right? Like, I've been thinking about that. Every image we've seen of the gnome, they kind of got the hood up, they got the kind of creepy looking mask on, right? I mean, are you going to pick that? Is that like something you do at the character creator? Is that like part of their headgear? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure though that you'll be creating that. Like, that's, you know, they have to wear that. They to contain their essence and their being. They're actually inside of their clothing. You see what I'm saying? Like, they don't have a body. So I thought that was really cool and worth mentioning about the gnome, and that they probably are the most kind of mysterious race of all of them, you know. But anyway, the gnome is kind of limited too, like the halfling. The gnome can be an enchanter, they can be a necromancer, a rogue, a summoner, or a wizard, and that's it. You know, they got 5 things they can be. They look like a necromancer to me. You know, like when I think of a necromancer, yeah, like that's it. The gnome is it. So anyway, let's move on to the ogre. The ogres look really cool. This is a race I wouldn't expect to be in the launch of a game, to be honest. They look like something that would be released in expansion. They're huge, you know, they're just huge mountains of creature, right? And they look really cool, and like all the images we see them, they're wearing like bones on their armor and stuff, and they're just really cool. The ogres are all about valor and courage and war, right? Like fighting and just war, but they're not idiots, right? Like the ogres aren't just like brainless fools that just mindlessly slaughter everything, right? Like the ogre is considerate and cautious, actually. However, if you piss one off, man, you're in big trouble, dude, because these things are huge, dude. Like, there's nothing even comparable to the gargantuan ridiculousness of these guys, right? Here's what's interesting, though. The ogre can only be 4 things. It's the most limited class, or the most limited race in the game. An ogre can be a dire lord, a druid, which is very interesting, a shaman, or a warrior. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see an ogre paladin, I'm not gonna lie, it just seems silly. But it, you know, I just think we're gonna see a lot of tanks, right? Like, I know there's not a lot of options, so obviously, you know, statistically speaking, obviously there's 2 tanks out of the 4 that they can be. But I'm just saying, even if that weren't the case, like, you got a giant race like the ogre, you're just gonna want people just gonna want to slap heavy armor on it and relish 2-handed weapons and just bash skulls in, right? Which looks exactly what the ogre would be good at. And the last race I want to talk about, and another very interesting race, right? Like, just kind of left field, like Visionary, I'm just kind of like, oh, check this out. You know, this is not like anything you've ever seen before. Maybe the Predator, you know, like I don't know what else I can compare these guys to. But the scars are very cool. You know, the little ones with the bone shards kind of sticking out of their skin kind of look like real savage, right? Like a tribal savage group of people. And that's exactly what they are, you know? They're very tribal and like suicidally vicious. That's literally a description given for them, right? Like suicidally vicious, right? Like these guys are crazy. They got a lot of endurance and they're quick, right? Like they're if you just look at their stance and the way they hold themselves, they're like, you know, ready to attack like a predator, right? Like a lion or something. You know how they just have that stance where they can just pounce real quick. So that's what I get out of the Scar. Like this is just a brutal, vicious, like, you know, their story's just gonna be brutal. I feel like, right? Like it's just gonna be the most adult, you know, vicious storyline probably of just, you know, their hunting rituals, you know, they're tribal, so they probably have like sacrificial religious practices, etc. So the Scar is just going to be really cool, almost like a dark, almost like evil race, right? Let's look at what the Scar can be. The Scar can be a Dire Lord, of course. They can be a monk. They can be a necromancer, of course they can. They can be a rogue, a shaman, or a warrior. Okay, so once again, the Dire Lord or the warrior for the tank classes, and I always talk about the tanks because, you know, that's what I am, so a little biased there. But it is interesting to look at the Scar because, say, it's just hard to imagine that you would pick a Scar and want to be a healing type, right? Like, seems kind of weird to me. But anyway, they can be a shaman, right? So we're going to see that. We're going to see Scar shamans. It's going to... But I guess with the tool set the shaman has, I mean, it makes sense, right? The Scar would be one. But anyway, guys, that's just kind of what I want to do today. I talked a little bit longer about some than I did others. But as I began talking, I just didn't want it to go too long. But very cool, man. I mean, we really got some really hard thinking to do on these races to make a decision on what we want to do, in my opinion. Now, a lot of these we haven't really got to see in motion a lot, right? Or at all. So, I think that's going to help. I think as we get closer and more videos and more information and more artwork and more screenshots and then regular play with them, and the character selection is really where it's going to all come into play. But I thought I'd just make a little video. We talked a little bit about each race, kind of a little bit of a breakdown about each one, and then you know, your options, so you can kind of be thinking about what you want to do, because different people approach this different ways. You know, some people pick the race first, right? Like, you know, some people are like, oh, I'm gonna be a dwarf, period. Now, what can a dwarf be? And then I'll pick one of those. Other people pick what class they want to be, and then they look for something compatible and try to find, hopefully, something they like. Now, some of these classes, man, are really limited. Specifically, the Paladin, right? Like, the Paladin, there's only 2 races that you can be a Paladin. A human or a dwarf, and that's it. The Cleric only has 3. You know, which, of course, the Cleric and the Paladin are from the same order, so I guess it's understandable. The only other thing that the Cleric can be that cannot be a Paladin is the Dark Mirror. You know, the Dark Mirror, the Dwarf, and the Human. Which, of course, my wife plans on playing a Cleric. She likes the Dark Mirror the best. No, that was coincidental. She knew she wanted to be a Cleric before she even took a look at the races. So we kind of lucked out there, to be honest, because she just said, yeah, I want to be a Cleric and I want to be this race right here. And I was like, well, crap, I hope it's compatible. So I looked up and I was like, oh, thank God, you know, because you don't want her, you know, in a situation where she's not getting, you know, she has to pick a different race. I have no idea what she would do, but, you know, everything's working out. I do love it. I do like that the lore really just, not even just the lore, just the aesthetics, the visual appearance of the different races match with what they can be, right? Like I can imagine each race is each one. Some of them feel awkward, a little bit, but not really. Not when you look into the history of the race. Maybe, what they do and what they're about, it all starts coming into play. But anyway, guys, I don't want to take any more of your time. Let me know. What are you guys thinking? What are you right now, as early as we are from launch? What do you want to play as? Did you want to play a race or a specific race, but unfortunately the class you want to play doesn't match up? Does that matter to you? Does the races even matter? Do you care? Do you really just care about classes and gameplay? Are you into that, creating a character and tweaking them, making them look just how you want? I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. But guys, thanks for joining me, and before you go, if you aren't already subscribed, please consider doing so, as we'll be making more and more videos about all kinds of things doing with Terminus and Pantheon Rise of Fallen. And guys, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something out of this. God bless and happy gaming.